Oh, hey, girlfriends. Welcome to the Shameless Era podcast. I'm Justine Eno.
And I'm Lindsay Dalen.
And like all the past weeks we've had leading up to here, we have an amazing guest with us today. And I'm so excited. This is a mentor of mine, someone that I looked up to and still do look up to quite a bit. And she was my boss in Red Deer. So I would like to introduce Krista VandenBrink. And so Krista, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, girlfriend.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
Yeah, we're excited. You're our first Central Alberta guest.
Absolutely.
So yay for that. But when Lindsay and I had discussed starting this new season of our podcast, we knew it had to be guest centered. We wanted to bring in some really powerhouse women that could speak to what we're speaking to. And I'm starting my list and jotting it down, and you and Bonnie were the first people to my list of like, we need to have each of them on the podcast because not only have you been such an inspiration to me in my whole career in my life, but I know to so many people. So I just want to kind of start to talk about your journey. So you're from Nova Scotia. Originally, what brought you to Central Alberta? Because I don't even know this.
Oh, well, a job that was not at all related to the job I'm doing now brought me to Central Alberta. So I was doing my second degree, in Halifax. It was a public relations degree. And before my graduation ceremony, I was hired by the city of Red Deer, actually. So hired on for a special project, and that brought me to Alberta. I was one of those East Coast folks that came west. And so I started working for the city in a public relations role. And to be perfectly honest, that role, it's what brought me to where I am today, and being an entrepreneur. But when I first moved to Red Deer, I was like, "Ooh, I'm not sure this is for me." I was 25, I think, and it was hard to start over. I didn't know anybody, and yeah, it was a bit tricky. And I had contemplated actually breaking my contract and moving home, but then I met a boy. And here we are, we're still together.
Baby. Right?
Yeah.
And so you and Chad have been married for how long now?
Oh God. 16 years?
Yeah, long time. And
Congratulations.
you both own a business together as well on the side of like breathing room. So I mean, we're talking like entrepreneur on every side.
Yeah.
Amazing. And then so this leads me into my next question though, is how did you and Bonnie meet? So you said you didn't know anyone. I don't know how you and Bonnie met.
Really? Oh, yeah. We met at Yoga in the Park.
Okay.
Yeah. So like I said, didn't know anybody. I started doing yoga as a way to meet people. And I saw a poster for some free yoga in Kin Canyon Park here in Red Deer. And I thought, okay, well, let's do it. I'll give it a try. And it was Bonnie, my now business partner and one of my nearest and dearest. She had just gotten back from India and had just moved to Red Deer herself and was teaching some free yoga in the park. So that's how we met.
That's so crazy. I didn't know it started with yoga. That was
Yeah.
It sounds like such a serendipitous moment, like almost out of a movie of just like you guys were meant to be in that space at that same time. And that's wonderful.
Exactly. Yeah. It's wild how it's all lined up and continued to grow from there.
Those are how the best partnerships start, right? Is just like without the intention, I think, of a partnership, but you meet and you're like, oh, like, how can we not move forward together? So then after you and Bonnie met, how long was it before you guys started percolating about the breathing room and starting all of that journey?
You know, I want to say it was maybe about a year.
Okay.
And Bonnie had already had breathing room in her mind. She had
Oh.
already written the business plan. And she had mentioned to me when I started talking about, maybe doing a teacher training, we were kind of like sussing each other out a little bit. Friends from my part, but friends and a business partner from her perspective, I think. And so the more we got to know each other and the more, I don't know, our values seemed to align, and our ambitions and what we wanted to do in life seemed to align. She had floated the idea of opening a yoga studio together. And like I said, she had already had the business plan. And when I said, yeah, okay, I'd like to look at that, it kind of grew from there. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And then
Mhm.
so you guys opened in 2011,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
13 years.
Oh,
13 years. It's wild. We opened in 2011, and gosh, I want to say about 6 months before we opened, I found out I was pregnant.
Way
So
Always.
yeah, it was a wild ride, but
Me,
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
I've learned quickly we don't get to pick the timing of our babies. No,
Never,
they just happen
never.
when they happen. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's I guess if we were able to choose the timing of our babies, lots of us would never choose to have babies because it's
Oh, God.
never a perfect time to have a baby, right? So,
Never. No.
all right, and then so you guys started in 2011 in the
Mhm.
one location, and then how long after until you moved to the location that I call home?
Yeah, 5 years. And
Okay.
so when we first opened our first location, it was like, I want to say a custom build because it was like gravel floors. They were just building the building. Um, and, big aspirations, but we grew out of that place or out of that space within the first year. It had just kind of exploded beyond what we had ever really anticipated. I mean, we had hoped for a lot of success. But yeah, within a year, we were kind of bursting at the seams, but we had a 5 year lease. So after 5 years, we doubled our space from 2,500 square feet to 5,000. And that's where we remain today.
Oh, wow. Did that kind of feel almost like whiplash in that first year of business? Like that sounds like pretty wild, immediate success.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I can speak for both of us when I say yes, but I think we probably experienced it similarly in a lot of ways, but also different because we opened in September. By April, I had had my daughter and took 3 months off to kind of figure out the whole like, how the heck do I be a mom? And then went back to work and brought her with me to the yoga studio. And so it was whiplash in a million different ways.
And then Bonnie had her son not
Yeah.
too shortly after, right? Because he's around the same age as your daughter.
Yeah.
So it's
He's
like that.
about a year younger than my daughter, a year and a couple months. Yeah. So
That's a
a
lot.
lot happened in those first couple of years.
I mean, we're gonna have a chat with Bonnie here, hopefully in a couple of weeks as well. But if you don't mind, and it's okay if
Mhm.
you do, what were some of your guys' biggest challenges in those first 5 years before you moved to the new location? Just as new entrepreneurs, but also as two women entrepreneurs working together, figuring out a friendship and a business relationship, and also motherhood all at the same time.
Everything you just said for me. Um, when it came, and still to this day, when it comes to our relationship, our business relationship, our personal relationship, we let the yoga guide the way. When it comes to making decisions, when it comes to how we present ourselves to one another, to the world, to our community, yoga is kind of yoga is our guiding path. And we make decisions and are informed um, just by the path of yoga, the yamas, the niyamas, the philosophy. Um, so that has helped immensely. We don't know any other way to do that. And I think that we are where we are because of that. Um, we do things in a way that maybe a lot of entrepreneurs don't. We just have a different lens, I guess you could say. So challenges, I think the first challenge we had was if we're talking, tangible challenges, finding a location. We had invested a lot of time in one location and that didn't pan out. And that was really frustrating, like months, maybe close to a year. I don't remember exactly. Like, is this ever going to happen? Is this meant to be? But we stayed the course and thank goodness we did. Also, as two young women in our early 30s. Nobody, there was one bank that wanted to give us money.
That took you seriously, for sure.
Yeah. Everybody else was just a hard no. And this business plan that Bonnie had initially put together was brilliant. I had added a little bit of, not a lot, but a little bit to it. And we were going in to look for financing, to look for business loans with a business plan that I can only imagine was so thorough and that we were so proud of. We had done business geographics research. Like we had looked at the traffic patterns at the specific corner we wanted to build our studio in. Like we had done focus groups. Like we had put a ton of work into this. We weren't just, throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it would stick. And so that was incredibly frustrating. Having people just say, yeah, no, we don't think it's viable, or not even give us a half an hour. It was really, really frustrating and
There was
hard.
tons of money in Red Deer at that time too, right? Like the economy was booming
Booming.
at that time, and it should have been a no-brainer. And I mean, I think that as women, we face that a lot more than
Well, and
men.
I mean, as somebody who has experienced rejection hundreds of times in my career as a sales professional, I know
Mhm.
how that feels, girlfriend. Like when people tell you that they don't believe in your idea, they don't want to support you. And so, how did you and Bonnie work through that rejection over and over again to stay the course and make your dream come true
We just put our heads down and kept going.
for you?
um, After the first location fell through and we had the second one, we were like, okay, this is it. Like we're on the right path. And we just kept going. We just kept moving through it. We put our own money into it as well. And so, yeah, we found a bank that finally said, yeah, okay, we can look at this. And, we did so much of the labor ourselves too, because we didn't have a lot of money to play with. Yes, we ended up getting, the business loans and putting some of our own in, but we're talking millions of dollars, that's for sure. So between the two of us and our husbands and friends, we were doing painting. We were like, our husbands were actually putting the tiles on the shower stalls, the insides of the shower stalls, 8 hours before we opened. Like it was it was a lot of manual labor on our parts. And looking back, I was also pregnant and so sick. And Bonnie and was just like so supportive. It was a wild time, but I think only in hindsight now can personally I look back and go, oh my gosh, that was wild. It was wild. But
And you guys taught most of the classes yourself when you first opened as well, right? You didn't have too many teachers come in until later. So you were also pregnant. I know I've heard a story of you teaching a class and then having to run out back and
oh
pop
gosh,
the
yeah.
cookies because you weren't feeling very good. But like
Oh,
it's hard work.
Yeah,
Like
I believe it.
I think I mean, we all know, the three of us sitting here, how hard it is to start a business, to run a business, and to do those things. But to let alone like do it for the first time, being pregnant, and then
yeah.
all the work that has to go into it, like it's crazy. But you guys have built, like I said, it's my home away from home, and I know so many people say that about breathing room. But it's the place that I fell in love with my passion. And I have told Lindsay this story and she laughed pretty hard, but I remember I did Lisa's mom and taught class, and
Mhm.
that was my first yoga experience. And I fell in love with it. And that wasn't even really yoga because you're bringing your baby. So it's like,
Yeah,
it's half yoga.
yeah.
And then I remember I went to Bonnie's class and she asked if anyone knew, and I like popped up my hand and I was the only one, all embarrassed. But it was
Oh.
after that class I went to her and I was like, I would like to be a yoga teacher. Can you help me? And she was like, I don't know you. But it's
No.
a space that I fell in love with and I returned to. Like you both have created such a community. And I think that's a lot of weight on both of you to carry of a community. How do you do that? Like you, it's a lot. And even as a teacher, like so many people come to you every day after class and they unload.
Yeah,
It's a privilege, but it's
absolutely.
also a weight.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
how do you, like, how do you manage that?
For me personally, it's been a bit of a learning process. We all go through our teacher trainings, and we take from it what we need in the moments that we're in it. And I was very lucky, and Bonnie too. We both went to India, and our teachers, we learned from the source. And Bonnie went first, and she kind of forged the path, and I followed behind her. And I remember, having conversations in India about, there's a lot of energetic aspects and spiritual aspects if you want there to be in the practice of yoga. And when somebody comes out of a class and they've done a lot of hip openers, maybe they have a lot of things to share afterwards, and things get emotional. And so I knew that, and I knew it from my own practice. But when it happens in real life from real time, it can be a little bit jarring. And like you said, it's a privilege that people trust you to share in those moments.
Mhm.
And so for me, I've learned to, and this is a bit of a buzz phrase, I've learned to hold space for people to share what they need to share, and then kind of close that container, and look at it as a very sacred container, a container that I was very privileged to be in with that person, but then set it aside.
Mhm.
Because in those moments when people share, there's so much vulnerability and an emotion that I need to step back and not necessarily take that on, but also not carry that, so that that person, when they come in the next day, feels like they have to re-explain themselves or feel awkward in that moment. So my job is a listener and somebody to hold that energetic space, for whatever healing or catharsis needed to take place in that moment, but not own it myself, because it's not mine. I happen to be the very privileged vessel that somebody trusts enough to share. Um, but that's my role. It's not to counsel. It's not to, advise. It's to listen and to hold the space, because outside of listening, you know, my scope of practice is yoga. It's not, psychology or therapy. And I think that has been a very firm boundary for me. And that's kind of how I look at it. It took some time because, all of us have empathy and compassion. And that's not to say that everybody that comes out of a yoga class, pours their heart out to you, or, it's a really awful story. There are lots of beautiful, joyous things that people share too, but it's a container. It has to be for both the person that's sharing and for me in that case.
Yeah, breathing room is such a safe space for so many people, and I had the privilege to connect with so many yogis there. I walk back in still like 5 years, well,
Yeah.
3, 4 years later, and people are like, "Are you coming back?" And I'm like, "Oh, just for today."
Yeah.
But it's such a home for people. Once you're
Mm.
part of that community, you're in it and you're safe. And I know that so many people have come there on their darkest days and their best days to celebrate or to just be in the space of like, I've had people come in and be like, I'm just gonna lay in Shavasana and listen. Great.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
such a fostering,
Amazing.
welcoming space. And I know, and I'm just gonna throw it out there, you don't have to at all. But I know a lot of yoga spaces can be bougie and uptight and like,
Yeah.
that style, and that's great for who that works for.
Yeah.
But breathing room has always just been such an inclusive, beautiful
Oh,
community to be a part of. So
yeah.
kudos to both you and Bonnie for creating that space and continuing it to foster it for 13 years. That's crazy.
Oh, thank you.
Which leads me into what's new for breathing room. I kind of know, but do you want to share a little bit about what you guys have up and coming? And you guys
Yeah.
also introduced within the last 3 years spin.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
So coming out of the pandemic, every business, I think we all learned so much, not just the wellness business, every business. And so a lot of pivots needed to happen during COVID, post pandemic. So that's when we brought Spin online, which has been a wonderful addition. They're the yin and the yang. They complement each other beautifully. So that's been really exciting. We have a new cafe partner, which is super exciting. So they're in our space today, soft launching Stems Floral and Cafe. Stems is a floral shop that started in Calgary, actually, and they've been in Red Deer for several years now. So they are opening their second cafe location with us, and that's up and running today. So
Let me get this straight. You can go to yoga and then get yourself some flowers and a coffee afterwards.
oh yeah, not sure about the flowers yet. Not
What
sure
a
about the flowers
perfect
yet.
day.
Yes.
That's so
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, it's cool. And it was really important to both Bonnie and I that the yoga studio is the yoga studio. But when we both moved to Red Deer, not knowing anybody, community was so important to us, and not knowing where to start with it was really hard. So bringing the cafe in was inspired by that. Like that encourages people to stay and have a coffee and connect and talk and, you know, just maybe feel that sense of connection and community instead of just grabbing their yoga mat and walking out the door. And yeah, the cafe piece is huge.
People do.
Well, and
They stop and have a coffee, and like there's groups of women, and you'll see a new woman added to it or whatever, but they congregate and the patio opens. And
but even spin creates a totally different energy, I would assume, in the studio of just like, I know when I finish a hot, sweaty, spin class, the vibe has been pumping and you just want to high five everybody afterwards. And like, you just come out of there elevating and vibrating on such a different level than maybe out of a yoga class. And so it just changes the conversation, I would imagine.
100%. And, sometimes people don't want to leave. They're either, hyped up after a spin class, or they're so chill and blissed out after a yoga class that they want to stay in that energy. And so the cafe is a perfect opportunity for them to do that. Yeah.
so I'm
So
so
cool.
excited for STEM
Yeah.
because their other location just right beside the Red Deer Hospital, correct?
Yeah.
Across
Yeah.
the street. They just had a little cafe in there, like like 2 tables maybe, right?
Yeah, the cafe footprint itself, like the prep area, was quite large, but there wasn't a ton of tables. You're right.
This is like a perfect partnership. So that's exciting. So
So fun.
as this episode, when this episode airs, the cafe will definitely be open and ready to go. So go check that out. And then you guys, I don't know if it's close, but you are doing a 30-hour deep dive training
Mhm.
as well, right? Coming up.
Next week. So we've done 200-hour yoga teacher trainings in the past, and we're starting to kind of break off a couple of chunks. We did a 100-hour deep dive last summer, I believe. And then now we're chunking it down further to 30 hours. So it's for people who, might want to learn a little bit more about yoga off the mat, the philosophy and the energetics and the things like that, but not do a full teacher training.
Right.
So yeah, it's a really good opportunity to dip your toes in a little bit to the things that we just can't relay over the course of a 1-hour class. There's so much more to yoga than just the asana. So
Yeah.
That's so interesting to me because I've done yoga for years. I love yoga, but I've never felt the calling to go do like a 200-hour teacher training and really kind of go down that path. But the idea of having access to a 30-hour deep dive into the principles and the mindset, and I learned so much from Justine every single day because of her yoga background. And I just feel like I grow as a person, that would almost feel like a personal development endeavor for me to take on, not with an intention to teach, but just to grow as a person.
absolutely. And that's exactly, you've articulated it beautifully. That's exactly what these little chunks of yoga, we hope that they'll provide to people, is the opportunity to just look through a different lens. There's the lens that we all kind of default to in our day-to-day life. And then there's a yoga lens. And I think the yoga lens is kind of life-changing. It has been for me.
Really
So
It
yeah,
seems
I'm
to
sure
be
it
like
has been for you,
that.
Justine.
If anyone ever asks me, like, what's a pivotal moment in your life? And I'm like, my yoga teacher training. Like, I would be a completely different person today without that. And though it's still always like we say a work in progress, right? Like it's never dialed in, but I can tell on the days I'm in that yogic mindset and I'm there,
Yeah.
the days are so much easier.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Like they just the flow essentially of the day
Well,
is
it's like
there.
just yesterday, I was having a weird day. I was feeling off and just not really sure why. And you know that feeling, you just want to shake it, but it doesn't go anywhere. And Justine reminded me of the duality of things. And she was like, you know what? You can be feeling this, and this is also true. And it's like, I didn't grow up with these mentalities. I didn't grow up with these concepts. And they're absolutely life changing because in that moment, I instantly felt safe and secure in however I was feeling and was just okay with it, even though it was weird, but it was,
Yoga is so much self-work, right? Like it's us looking in and really diving into ourselves. So I think the 30-hour, and I was just gonna say the 200-hour I did, I think in my class, 3 of us became teachers out of like 25. So I think it's so cool that there is the smaller offerings because I think those people would benefit so much more from that because they don't actually want to be a teacher. They don't want to stand up in front of a class and teach. They just want to deepen their practice. So I'm excited to see how that all turns out for you guys. And I know you'll have a great group of people for sure with that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so we're gonna move on a little bit from breathing room.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask you a question, and of course, please just answer however your comfort level is with it. We've talked a lot about women on our podcast and how women treat women. So you're a huge figure in the Red Deer community, and how I know you've probably came across a lot of these encounters, but if you feel comfortable sharing just like an encounter where you felt really uncomfortable in the presence of other women, just maybe it was like the way that the vibe was, or you just didn't feel received very well, or anything like that. And then how did you work through it? How did you come out the other side?
Oh gosh. I have to say, I'll preface this story or this example with this was before I really threw my life into yoga. So yoga has helped me immensely deal with those kind of awkward and off-putting situations. But there was a couple of moments in my previous career where I was very fortunate. I say fortunate, but I worked hard. I worked my ass off in my previous career as well to get to where I was. But I was quite young. I was in my career at the time that I spent in government was from like my mid 20s to my early 30s. And yeah, like I said, I worked my ass off to get to where I was, and I was in a management position. And I had to make some tricky decisions sometimes, especially in areas where the women I was working with were quite a bit older than me. Um,
That's tough.
yeah. And I look back now and, through the lens of yoga, I can see there were insecurities all around from myself, from other women, from the people that surrounded all of us. And so I'm able to see it differently. But in that moment, or in those moments, I always felt like it was me against them or them against me. Um, and I would react according to that. Um, I need to make sure you see my point. And I also have I can say this now. I also have a bit of a chip on my shoulder because I'm 28, 29 years old, and you're in your 50s, and I need to prove myself, and I'm going to be really assertive about it because I feel like I have to be.
Mhm.
And so that's how I would respond in those cases. I can think of one that has stuck with me. I was working with a consultant on a really important project that was going to have huge budget implications for the department I was working with. Um, and we were disagreeing about something, and she went to what I feel was a really petty place. I forget what I said, but she had commented on a word that I said, like, is that even a word? And she was like flicking her hair back and stomping around the room. And I was like, oh, like I had never felt that type of, um, I don't know. I just felt really small in that moment. Like she was picking apart literally my words,
Oh,
everything I said. And I went back to my office and I cried. And so that is one experience that I will never forget. This person was older than me, but I was the one paying her and her company tens of thousands of dollars to do this work. And the pushback that I got in those moments was really, really petty. And like I said, looking back now, I see insecurities all around. And I can,
it sounds like.
yeah, like I was really insecure. So I know that I reacted strongly. And I reacted in a way I wouldn't react today. And she reacted very strongly to my reaction. And
Mhm.
it was this, it went around and around and around. And so it was a really toxic project, a really toxic situation. But yeah, I dealt with it by crying in my office, which I said I would never do as
Mhm.
a young woman and a professional. I was like, no, first of all, I'm not going to do it. God forbid if I did it, it was going to be hiding in my office.
Mhm.
Nobody could see me. Um, and then I think the way I got through it was I talked to my boss about it, but I tried to leave out the stereotypes, I think, of women in business. She
Bitter.
did this and then I did that. I didn't want it to be the back and forth. I went to my boss to say, how would you deal with this type of conflict? Because I knew um, that by talking about it in a certain way, I was going to perpetuate the stereotypes that exist for women in business. And yeah, I couldn't do that. And so that was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me. And I was like, ooh, if I can't talk to my boss about what actually happened, what am I doing to contribute to those stereotypes?
Right.
And yeah, it was a big learning project for me.
I have so many thoughts on this story right now. First of all, super proud of you for making it back to your office before you started crying. Good job, girlfriend. I'm a firm believer in don't let them see you cry. We all
Yeah.
cry, but in private, I think is where you get the most out of it. But sometimes we just can't win women over. Like there are just unfortunately some of those women out there that don't understand how to work with other women, how to connect with other women, how to respect another woman. And that's a large part of why we're doing this podcast is to demonstrate respect and collaboration over competition and to elevate, the conversations that we're having as women. And I think it's so cool that you can look back on that story now and understand what you learned from it, understand how you would have changed your response now, some 10, 15 years later, and how it helped you grow as a woman.
Yeah, and I was an active participant in that situation. I'm absolutely not saying I was the victim of some crappy behavior because I was contributing to it as well. And at the time, I, I'm like, who can I look at as a role model?
Mhm.
Um, and there weren't a lot of women around me that I could look to. One of them was my director of the division I was in, who was a trailblazer. And she was the one I went to. Um, and she just listened and yeah, that was a light bulb moment, Lindsay. Like, yeah, looking back is so powerful. And I think that when women have trouble relating to one another, I think, and this is just my opinion, we all just want we all want positive results, and we all want to feel seen, and we all want to feel heard, because historically we haven't really been in the position to be seen and heard. And we've learned from our mothers and grandmothers and, reading that we have to be assertive to be heard. And while I believe that's true, we can show assertion in ways that still feel authentic to us. We don't have to take on that, masculine role that we see so often portrayed in media, for example, or television. We can still be assertive and get our point across in a way that feels authentic to us as women. And what I've learned is that that looks very different for me than it does for my husband. We both still get the job done. We come at it in very different ways, and that's okay. In fact, it's kind of our superpowers, right? As men and women, how we relate to people. And so it took me a while to learn that I can be assertive, but I don't have to be assertive in an aggressive, what would typically be seen as a masculine way. And to be very clear, I don't believe in, the masculine and the feminine in terms of their stereotypes. But stereotypically speaking, I think we see men being straightforward in a specific way, in a specific container. And women, I think, try to mimic that sometime when it's just not always in our nature to deliver our communication that way. Does that make sense?
And then that's when the B word comes out. When women are assertive in the same way as men, that's when other women call us bitches.
Yeah.
That's what bitches, when we're just rising to the same level of energy. And it's just like, oh, girlfriends, get that word out of your vocabulary.
Unless it's in a good way.
Yeah.
So I want to, I'm like looking, the time is flying by. So I really want to give you a shout out here to, you became a Lulu Lemon ambassador this year.
Oh yeah.
Girl, I was so stoked for you when I seen that pop up on my social media. I was like, yes. And the photo shoot was hot and awesome. I love it. And so how's that journey been?
It's been good. It's Lulu Lemon, like any big company, is evolving over time, and their ambassadorship looks different now than it did 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And when they approached me, it was I think through the lens of, yes, yoga, but also community and supporting community. And community is very important to me. I'm on a board and things like that. So Lululemon's connection to community was huge for me. And it's been exciting. And what's really cool is I'm just so proud that a huge company like Lululemon has a woman in her mid-40s through the menopausal hormone therapy on their wall. I think it's so cool that a company like Lululemon said, hey, you know what? We want you to kind of help our community and be associated with our brand. And it doesn't matter what your age is, or that you're a mom, or that you're going through this menopause trend. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because what we see is you, and not what what maybe we think yoga teachers should look like on the cover of Yoga Journal, or whatever that is. So yeah, that's really the part I'm most excited about.
How far, our world has come, in the sense of 20 years ago, that wouldn't have ever happened. It's 18-year-old, hard-bodied, thin models, young.
She doesn't even
retire you at 21. She doesn't even do yoga.
Yeah.
But that's what people want, is they want real life. They want authentic. And it's just so beautiful to see the world moving in that direction. And so huge congratulations. That's absolutely massive. And sounds like kind of like the epitome for every, yoga teacher to be a Lululemon ambassador at some
Oh
point.
yeah,
So
those were my highlights whenever I got to teach for you. I was so excited. But you deserve to be on that wall more
thank
than
you.
anything. And I can't wait till the next time I'm down in Red Deer and I can go take a selfie
selfie.
with it. But yeah, I was incredibly proud. And you're so involved in your community. So the last time you and I got to see each other in person, we talked more on the community side, which you and I have never really got to dive into together. I moved away too soon. But you are the board chair for the Community Foundation for the Red Deer and District Foundation. Sorry, I said that a little backwards.
That's okay.
So we talked about, because Lindsay and I did the NAF tour up here.
Yeah, so cool.
Talked a little bit about that when I came down, and how is everything going with the foundation, and how's all that going?
It's going great. So I got involved with the Red Deer and District Community Foundation, oh man, probably 8 years ago now, through the Women of Excellence program. And yeah, that's kind of this consistent theme in my life is women. So that drew me in, and I am just so proud of the work the foundation does throughout Central Alberta and the role we play, yes, as funders, but also as community connectors and facilitators of really meaningful conversation. And yeah, things are going really well. We just launched kind of a micro grant program. We are inviting, I think it's 3 new board members to the table. We just went through that process, and it's exciting. We have lots of strong women on the board. We have lots of incredibly strong men on the board, and conversations are really, really interesting around that table.
I bet I would love to be a fly on the wall in one of
Yeah.
those. Yeah. Well, no, that's amazing. And you've been the board chair for 2 years now?
No, gosh, I've been interim board chair a couple of times when shuffling has happened at the executive level, and then I've been kind of quote unquote permanent board chair for 2 years. So in total, probably about 4 years. But yeah.
So amazing. And so this is going to lead me into the last thing I wanted to make sure I touch on, because this is like, it might sound a little creepy, but it's like it's like a thing in our house that Aria will come to me and ask me to look at your social media so she can see what your daughter's doing. So it's, your daughter has become, in my lens looking in, this like mini version of you and your husband, because your husband is very philanthropic in the community as well. But she is just a powerhouse. Like, and she's 12, correct? Or 11?
No, she just turned 12 last weekend.
Yeah. So she's like, she's gonna take over the world one day. Like she will be like premier, the first woman premier of Canada. Like she is.
That's funny.
Yeah. She's an inspiration just in herself for being like, some days I'll look at your social feed and I'll be like, oh, Justine, do better. Like Gretchen like kicking the world's ass today, and you are sitting on the couch. Do better, Justine. So yeah, how is raising such a headstrong, independent, ambitious little girl in a world that we're in right now?
Yeah. It is my biggest challenge, my biggest joy as well. It's so funny last night, right? Well, yeah, you guys know you have girls, strong girls. On the way home from Taekwondo last night, so she's a Taekwondo athlete, we were talking about, she said something to the effect of, well, now I'm like 5'5", and I'm 12, I'm a teenager. You can't force me to do anything anymore. I was like, oh, here we are. Okay. I was like, you know what? You're right. I can't force you to do anything. But I can instill or implement consequences for things that, you know, we don't believe as a family would be the right choice. And so we started talking about that. And I had said to her, you know, being your mom is the most important thing in my life, but it's also the hardest thing because as moms, we never want, you know, to make our kids sad or mad. Um, but that's why it's so freaking hard, is because it's our job to teach. And when we teach or try to guide, it doesn't always make them happy. And if they're headstrong, my child, it's not a I'm going to be mad at you for 20 minutes and then get over it. It's something that she remembers for months on end.
It's like a list in her closet.
Totally.
Well,
Totally.
we got to be the mean mom. And that's just part of the job, is like, yeah, it sucks for us. We don't want to be the mean mom right now, but like we have to until you understand this and why it's such a, critical life lesson. Like,
Well, we had Laura Lavalley on the
Mhm.
podcast a couple of weeks ago, which I'm sure you know, she's like the
Mhm.
equivalent of you up here in GP for the foundation. And
Yeah.
she said something in it. I'm like, oh, I need to take that advice with me. And it's exactly what you're saying is I need to be your mom right now so I can be your friend later.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, gotta put that on the wall so I can remind
Exactly.
myself of friendship can come later, but right now I have to
Mhm.
be a mom, and sometimes that's crappy. Like, not crappy, it's great, but sometimes
Yeah.
do the crappy things, right?
100%. And I just, you know, I think that the more we challenge our children, in our case, daughters, by giving boundaries, the stronger they become and the more they understand boundaries too. And boundaries for everybody is so important, but boundaries for girls, I think, is super important.
Yeah.
And yeah, she has boundaries, which I'm really proud of. But sometimes those boundaries include me. I'm like, hold on. Like, I'm your mom. You can't put a boundary around me. But yeah, I want her to be able to come to me and talk about anything to me. And yeah, my husband and I have always said, you know, we'll never get mad at you for telling us something that you feel is really awful. We might not agree with what you've done or what you've told us, but we can promise you that we will never get mad because you had the courage to tell us.
Mhm.
And there won't be consequences.
We talk about this all the time of just like how important it is, especially in the world today, how
Mhm.
fast I know, like things are just moving at a faster pace, right? Like they're learning things at a younger age and all of these things, how important it is to keep that communication line open, which
Yeah.
means we can't get mad when they communicate with us. We have to like really like
Ugh.
or yoga or whatever tools you have to hold that crap in until you can go cry about it later in the closet
Yeah.
or wherever,
Yeah.
because yeah, you have to like make sure that they want to keep talking to you. Cause the
Yeah.
second that they stop talking to you, I think is when it gets dangerous. So
Totally. And you know, we say to Gretchen all the time, like, or you know, in certain circumstances, I don't have the answer for you, babe. Like I don't know. Or, you know, I mess up all the time, and making sure she hears me say, you know what, I'm sorry. I responded in a really crappy way to what you did or what you said. And I think that that's how I don't know, for us, that's how we want to raise our daughter, is
yeah,
she sees that adults make mistakes, therefore she can make mistakes.
yeah,
Um, and yeah.
I
Well, and
totally
they're
agree.
always watching. Like, I've
Always.
become
Yeah.
hyper aware of the fact that my girls are always watching me. And,
Mhm.
like, I love sharing the story about confidence that I got from my mom. Before a big meeting, the last thing she would do is put on her lipstick. And it
Yeah.
was her war paint. It was like her power move, like immediately turning on her
Confidence
confidence.
on.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
she didn't notice me watching my whole life, but now I do the same thing. I put on my lipstick and I'm ready to go. And
That's
so I'm
so cool.
aware that my girls are watching and they're seeing me in these moments, and how I handle them is helping shape them into the women that they will become someday. And honesty, authenticity, communication, keeping the conversation open, I really think is the key to kind of guiding them in the right direction.
Yeah, and vulnerability, to go back to, the question you had asked earlier about being in a tough situation with other women. You know, I make sure that Gretchen sees vulnerable times, whether it's business or like a conversation I'm having with my husband or a friend. Like, I think vulnerability is so important. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
Mhm.
And, we've had the opportunity to be vulnerable with one another a lot more in the past year. And it's been so special because, when was it? August, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And um, 4 months later, she was as well. And so we've had the opportunity to both be really vulnerable with one another and share things that we feel and be okay with it. Like, yeah, I feel crappy and shame about this part too. And she'll be like, oh, you too, mom, me too. And
Oh,
so it's been, I don't know, that vulnerability piece with our daughters and our sons. But in my case, my daughter has been huge, letting her know that it's okay to feel what you feel, because it gives us an opportunity to work through it and figure it out so that when we inevitably feel that feeling again, we'll know how to get through it.
totally.
And yeah, it's
I
been
love
important.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to see what she does with like her life. I really can't because it's gonna blow everyone's mind. And but just like you've blown so many people's minds. You've inspired so many people. And I was saying to Linz before the podcast started because she was like, "Oh, tell me a bit about Krista." And so we're talking, and I said, I had originally formed a really close bond with Bonnie, and I still do.
Yeah.
Our relationship was, I call it a slow burn. I have a few friendships that have been a slow burn. Um, but you are such a safe and calm space. And I'm so grateful for the time we got in person together, and our relationship continues. We still stay in contact. So I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. And thank you so much for always being there for me and for sharing everything today. I know that I took away a lot, and I know a lot of people will take
Oh,
away
I
a
took
lot.
away a lot too.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
you know me, I like to close things with a quote. So,
Yeah.
and on our first two seasons of the podcast, I would close out with a quote, but this season we're asking our guests if they feel comfortable to bring a quote along with them to close it out. So, do you have one for us?
Um, oh gosh.
Just one that is always stuck with you, or
Or even just
Yeah.
words to live by,
yeah.
daily affirmations, even words to
Oh,
live by. Yeah.
I think for me, because my passion is yoga, but also women and girls, um, I always like to remind myself that my role as a mom, as a woman, as somebody in business, a woman in business, is to model an example, be an example, and make sure that every young girl and every woman, um, that they know that they can use their voice to make change. Um, use your voice and use your life as an example to make change.
Love
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it embodies who you are.
that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
thanks.
can't say enough great things about you. So thank you so much for being here today. And then I just wanted to throw it out there for our listeners, if they are in the Central Alberta area, how they can research the breathing room and look up memberships. I know you guys are having a spring and summer sale right now too, I think I see online.
Yeah.
So, how do they get in touch with breathing room?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. So we're located at 2840 Bremner Avenue. It's on the way to the mall.
Mhm.
Um, and we're in the big 105 building, the radio station building. But you can find us online at breathingroomrd.com. You can follow our socials. We're really active on Instagram, Facebook. And you can always give us a shout over email at info@breathingroomreddeer.com. And we would love to chat with you. We always say that we know the biggest hurdle to yoga is walking through that door for the very first time. So we get it. Once you walk through the door, you can just trust the process, and we will embrace you.
I second that. It's
Aw.
the easiest thing. It's like the hardest thing is pulling open the door. The
Yeah.
rest of it is like easy
That's right.
peasy. Yeah.
And thank
Aw.
you both so much. Justine, you are just a bright light. You are a brilliant yoga teacher. You're a wonderful mom, a wonderful business owner, and you are so inspiring. And Lindsay, I'm so glad to finally meet you.
Oh, such a
You're both
compliment.
doing incredible things. So
I thank you so much. You are absolutely lovely. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable with us today. I know this episode is going to have, she's got tears in her eyes.
Aw.
She's crying.
Yeah.
It's the baby hormones.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
it's a very special episode. So thank you
Yeah.
very much, Krista. We
Thank
appreciate
you
your
so
time.
much.
Thank you.